all of the effects that are happening around the world all line up for one purpose. That is taking money from the people and transferring it, it's called wealth transfer, to the financial elite.
Hey Reluctant Preppers, this is showing you just how easy it is to purchase silver without paying any premium over spot price. You just go to sdbullion.com/RP, scroll down and enter the special code to get silver without any premium, and they'll mail it to your mailbox, discreetly packaged. Inside you'll find a beautiful 10-ounce bar of fine silver, and you are able to purchase that and have it and add it to your stack and your collection without paying any premium. And you're supporting Reluctant Preppers along the way. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're delighted to have a new guest, first-time visitor at our channel today, Derrick Michael Reid. He is an unconventional combination of many skill sets and aptitudes. He brings together an ability to be analytical in a very multidimensional way about our world and what puts it together to help us understand some of what really drives the phenomenon that we may be otherwise subject to, and making it difficult for us to be aware and prepared. Derrick, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure, Dunnigan. Thank you for having me.
Your summary of capabilities is quite extensive. You've introduced yourself as a Bachelor of Science in Electronic Engineering. You're a patent lawyer. You're a Libertarian Senate candidate. You've been a military scientist, a market analyst, a geopolitical analyst. You put together a rather provocative summary that really pulls together what seem to many people to be disconnected or unrelated threads, but that in their gut they know something's not right, and for someone to be able to crystallize that and to articulate it and to be able to point a finger at it and say, look, this is the structure, this is how it holds together, this is how the tentacles all come together at a single nexus and for a single purpose, is extremely helpful. Whether anyone buys on completely or incompletely to your model, it's still a provocative and enlightening perspective that we want all of our viewers to be able to have to take advantage of, and just very grateful for you being willing to come on our channel and share that with us.
What has happened here is that I basically have analyzed what's going on. I'm not privy to the darkroom agreements. I can't read minds.
Sure.
I get secondhand information through the web, but every time I hear a fact, I start to build a nodal net of facts.
Of
and
course.
The more I hear the same facts, it becomes a weighted one.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And then after it becomes a weighted one, then you can start to guesstimate what's the probability of what's going on.
Sure.
So what has happened is that I've realized that all of the effects that are happening around the world all line up for one purpose. That is taking money from the people and transferring it, it's called wealth transfer, to the financial elite. That is the major thing that's going on. Whether or not we talk about fiat currency, insolvencies, wars, it all gets back to and has that link towards feeding the global elite more money in wealth transfer from the people to the elite. And that is probably the biggest picture that I can say. Each one of these little blobs that you see here is evidence that tends to support it.
Understood.
Okay. So I look at as their tentacles corrupting basically all systems, all governments, all markets, everything.
Makes sense.
Okay. So that is and that's a profound conclusion to come to, that all of these things that are happening have the result of transferring wealth. Now, when I say transfer of wealth, it doesn't have to be, taking somebody's money. It's just that if some guy's wages are stagnant and another guy is using monies to manipulate markets and gain wealth transfers that way. It's still the same kind of thing. If you talk about inflation, for example, the rich have assets. They can use money to manipulate markets. They can have assets that will naturally increase with inflation to protect their wealth. When you got a guy working paycheck to paycheck with stagnant wages, he's losing every single day through inflation, devaluation of his wages, his savings, and his pension. So that's the kind of the thing of the wealth transfer, like in stocks. It's all wealth transfer. Okay, nobody's really taking anybody's money. It's just wealth transfer. So the big conclusion is that all the big things that happen around the world have the effect of transferring wealth from the people to the financial elite. When you get down into the nuts and bolts about it, you find out that all of these systems, government, monetary, markets, they're all corrupt. And they're all corrupt in such a way as to facilitate that wealth transfer. Now, that's huge.
It is, and it's well, a lot of people don't connect those dots. So it's extremely helpful when you said you've built this coherent model that pulls it all together.
Right.
Let me have an opportunity to introduce you, and then we'll jump on in to try to start. We'll pick a starting point and move forward. But I'll save I was able to capture this intro that we already did, and we'll use that, and then we'll just splice the rest of our conversation after it, because that's a good intro.
Okay. This is going to be another little minute that I want to talk, and I don't know how. Are you going to be editing this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe this would be one thing. I am a skilled engineer. I was a problem solver. Then I went into litigation as a patent attorney. I was undefeated, where I learned more about tactics and strategies. Then I became a patent prosecutor, patenting the highest technology in the country, where I became a systems analyst, very complex systems, how things work together. I have also had experience in financial markets, particularly bullion. I've sold and bought $100 million worth of financial assets. I devised military games. I studied military tactics and strategies for 20 years. I also have been to Asia 12 times, studying geopolitics and culture around the world, plus domestic politics. When you look at the 5 major skills, engineering for problem solving, litigation and military science for tactics and strategies, then learning about patent law and systems analysis, then going to the subject matter of not only understanding various wars, their motivations, but also cultures and geopolitics. And when you have that skill set, and it's a 5 sigma, engineering, law, military scientist, bullion banking finance, and politics and geopolitics, you then have the skill set necessary to get your head around the world. And that's what I've done. And what I have discovered is that most of the market government systems are corrupt, and they all function through that corruption to transfer wealth from the people to the financial elite. I am currently running for the U.S. Senate in the state of California. I intend to unite Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and Libertarians to find common ground solutions to problems. I'm going to focus initially on immigration, overcrowded prisons, and DC corruption. But I also invite the electorate in California to consider that there will be a person now in the Senate who knows how to eliminate the national debt, who knows how to end systemic embedded corruption in DC, who knows how to stop wealth transfer from middle class to the elite. And these are significant things that the voters might want to have, because we're sitting at the precipice. I don't know if you noticed, but about a week ago, the bond market ticked up 25 basis and the stock market crashed 1,000 points. If that 40-year bull bond market starts to go down, the whole edifice could go down very quickly. And I believe that the Senate should have one person who knows how to recover quickly and who has already thought it all through and be Johnny on the spot with the solutions.
We absolutely have been watching that, and we've had a number of guests on our channel recently talking about the intimate connection between the 10-year bond trend and the interest rate and the stock market inflation and the systemic risks that exist there. So that's something that's been of grave concern to a lot of our viewers. In your proposed model that ties these things together, it was interesting because when we were scheduling you to come on, we were talking about whether we should talk about corruption or insolvency, and you said it's all connected. So can you talk to us about, let's start at the point of corruption, since that was a central point. And if you could kind of highlight what you think are the main headline points that people should be aware of in the area of corruption, and how then we can start exploring how those are connected to a lot of these other financial wealth transfer mechanisms.
If we talk about the United States, the Federal Reserve System is the epicenter of corruption in the country. It is controlled allegedly by Congress, but it is a private bank, and it feeds wealth to the member banks. Its primary purpose is to maintain the financial system. In so doing, it gives benefits and favors to banks. They can loan money, for example, to a bank at ZIRP, zero interest rate policy. That bank can then turn around and take that $1 trillion and park it back into the reserve, where it sits, does nothing, does not stimulate the economy, and the bank, at taxpayers' expense, makes a small interest rate differential, money for nothing. These banks and these corporations do the same kind of thing. The corporations can take the money, manipulate markets, and they're right, because the Fed, through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, puts them into bubble territory so they can blow them up and pop them, and blow them up and pop them. And when you get the price movement, the corporate traders, they come in and make windfalls. Corporate CEOs, they buy back their stocks. Okay, they have the corporation buy back the stock from free money from the Fed. Price goes up, CEO cashes in, its immediate windfall. The corporations, the banks then turn around and donate their campaign money to congressmen. These congressmen have oversight of the Fed, and I call it a symbiotic cyclic corruption cycle. It's embedded and it's systemic. And that is perhaps one instance. The second instance would primarily be the type of money used, and that's the fiat currency. Back in 1913, we were on the gold standard. The government could just not print gold. And so it made sense for the Federal Reserve System then to have member banks all with gold to back up the government. The government just couldn't print money. The usefulness of the Fed after 1972, when Nixon closed the gold window, is over. And one of my solutions is to nationalize the Federal Reserve to preserve its mechanics under the Department of Treasury, under direct administration control, with congressional oversights. That would be one of the first things that I would attempt to do as a U.S. Senator. So it is a combination of greed, corporate greed, trying to control government, and also the fiat money that is used.
When you mention fiat money, could you tie it, because you've been talking about the Federal Reserve and the U.S. fiat system from 1913 forward, but what about the global fiat system that other countries like Japan and others have, and then also make the connection, if you would, to how bankers seem to be not interested officially in gold, and yet there's some controversy around whether they are in fact amassing gold.
Right. First of all, on April 1st, 2009, I fingered China as secretly buying gold, and they had to confess. Basically, gold is real money. It has intrinsic value. I'm sure your listeners know this well.
Right.
Whereas a fiat dollar is a con game. It's nothing but confidence. It has zero intrinsic value. It does have some inherent value. If you don't pay your taxes in those irredeemable Ponzi coupons, they will throw you in jail. So there creates a certain amount of demand for them. And that is the base inherent value of the fiat money. But try to understand what fiat does. The government, for example, being corrupt as it is deficit spending. When it deficit spends, it has more dollars to spend than otherwise, which is a way of transferring wealth from the private sector to the public sector. And fiat is also used to transfer wealth from the people to the financial elite, and it's done on a global scale. Now, right now, the three main corporates are the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, and the Federal Reserve. And they kind of do a round robin. You know, the Fed will ease for a while and then stop, and then it's the European Central Bank's turn, and then it's the Japan's turn. But they are all printing massively. The banks are buying bonds, trying to keep the economies afloat, and it could go down in a heartbeat. So those are the two primary mechanisms that are used to corrupt the system, and that is deficit spending by governments and the use of fiat money.
Still at the end of the fiat money discussion, you were mentioning about how gold has intrinsic value, but what about the bank's relationship to gold? Are nations and central banks, China, Russia, other countries, are they in fact accumulating gold as you suggested?
I strongly believe, again, I'm not in the vault. I can't swear to it. All I can do is read stuff over and over again. And I've come to the conclusion that China and Russia, for state sovereignty purposes more than anything else, are buying gold hand over fist. Now, back in the 2000 to 2010, it was basically the central banks leasing out gold bullion to suppress the price. They suppressed the price of bullion so as to make the fiat dollar appear strong. Well, that kind of ended, and so you have now the gold cartel going in and shorting gold futures. They use futures to manipulate current prices. They use future contracts to manipulate the present day price. I am now under the understanding that the CME, the COMEX, does not have sufficient gold and silver to cover those standing for delivery, and so they are somehow passing those demands for delivery over to England, London, where they believe there is still some supply to satisfy those standing. You have a systemic, countrywide, nationwide, worldwide suppression of bullion prices, which is the historical real money, so as to prop up the fiat. Why do they want to prop up the fiat? Well, that goes to governments taking more control over people, and it also has to do with transferring the wealth to the financial elite. So the financial elite and governments want to maintain the fiat system as long as they can. Now, the Federal Reserve started with the silver dollar back in the 1930s. And the dollar has been reduced to 3% of its value then. So it's lost 97% of its value. But you can take that remaining 3% and all of a sudden blow it up and consider it to be modern day 100%. And they can just keep on devaluing the dollar, inflating it so as to rob people of their wages, savings, and pensions in perpetuity. Now, getting back to Russia and China. Both countries and many countries around the world have tremendous treasury bond stacks. And they don't like the U.S. devaluating their foreign exchange reserves. They also don't like being under the thumb of the U.S.-controlled currency transfer systems, the SWIFT, because of sanctions imposed. And so Russia and China are sitting there saying that this United States, they might impose sanctions on us. They're devaluating our Forex reserve, and they're using economic asymmetrical warfare against us to comply with their foreign policy. I can talk about the military aspects of Ukraine, but Russia, consistent with its historical, cultural mentality, being territorially expansionist, they saw the opportunity and took Crimea. That was Hillary Rodham Clinton blunder. And the U.S. responded with sanctions against Russia. Now, it's one thing to put sanctions against Iran, but when you go up against Russia, now we're talking about a serious world power. They are a serious world power. I've been there 12 times. They don't have the economy we do, but they have the means sufficient. They don't want the U.S. dictating to them how Russia should conduct its foreign policy. And so, and China sees this, what's going on. And so they know that the fiat system is going to come down. It's going to come down hard. We don't know when, and they want to be prepared. So you start to see foreign countries unloading their treasuries, and that makes the Fed have to buy them back to keep the market propped up, and buying gold hand over fist, because when the fiat falls, it's going to be one of two choices. It's either going to be a fiat SDR with a totalitarian UN global control over everybody, same system, fiat money, government control to feed the financial elite, or we're going to revert back to the only money that has been trusted for 5,000 years, and that's gold and silver. Now, I have plans about how to do a monetary reset in a seamless way. The way they're headed now, they're going for a big fall. Now, we should remember that George W. Bush deficit spent $4 trillion. Obama, $8 trillion. Trump has to deficit spend $16 trillion to kick the can to keep the system going.
Right.
If you will notice, there were no spending cuts in his tax bill. And even with the budget that came up, it certainly wasn't balanced. I call these the farcical Republicans, you know. They don't even realize that if you cut spending dramatically, you will slam the economy into a 10-year depression. They have no clue how to seamlessly do a monetary reset and get out of the mess that they're in. And I think it's has to do a lot with the congressman just getting used to large campaign funds and living fat. I mean, how does Senator Feinstein get to $80 million? She will be my main opponent. I mean, how do you do that on a civil servant salary? It just doesn't sound right. It doesn't look right. I think most people can put two to two together and say that, well, there's some little bit of influence peddling going on. There's going to be resistance to it from the from the congressman, Trump has no clue. From what I've heard now, again, I cannot read people's mind. I think that Trump, for all the naysayers, I like his tax cut. That reduces oppression. I like his deregulation. That increases our freedom. I like him getting out from international governments, the Paris Accord and the TPP, for example. Right. So, but there's like building that wall. I mean, I've lived in California my whole life. I don't want a scar on the land down there. And I don't agree with Trump on all issues, but he seems like a pretty intelligent guy. He seems like he's working hard. He seems like he's getting some stuff done. I stand shoulder to shoulder with Vice President Biden that he should be given an opportunity to govern. I think these progressive fascists on the left are just out of control, and it's nothing but pandering. In any event, getting back to it, Trump must deficit spend $16 trillion during his 8 years to keep the system imploding just based on spending. Remember, the national debt is exponentiating as the deficits are exponentiating. So, Rand Paul comes out and he talks about, we need significant spending cuts. And I sit there and go, this guy doesn't have a clue. If they sit there and all of a sudden balance the budget tomorrow, for example, the economy would be in a tailspin in a heartbeat. Then you can't do it that way. You have to do it seamlessly. So that's where we're at right now.
You made the connections between a lot of the corruption and illicit gains that are happening both at the corporate level and in Congress, and the conflicts of interest that exist to keep the status quo perpetuated in Congress and so on. But what about the connection? And you mentioned you mentioned Russia and China, but you briefly passed into the UN needing one option. You said a fork in the road could bring you totalitarian control in a global fiat system. Can you touch on that topic of globalization just a little bit further? Because I think there's more to be said about globalization. Right.
Globalization. Jim Rickards, by the way, he's a pretty good guy to listen to on this aspect of it. They call it the SDR. I think it's the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. It's a terrible name, but it's just another fiat currency. You see, in order to do a monetary reset, you must translate from one currency to another. So when the yen fails and the dollar fails and the euro fails, they're going to come up with some brilliant idea. Well, let's translate to the SDR, and there will be an exchange rate and everybody will go there. Well, that will put basically an international body now in control of the fiat currency, which is what the elites want. They don't want to have to micromanage, 50 different countries. If they can just bribe a couple of guys in the UN or at the top of the power, it makes their job a heck of a lot easier. But that's the other route that we're headed for. It is either going to be every man for himself, going back to real money, or it is going to be translating into the SDR. Now, of course, I prefer going back to real money because it will eliminate a lot of the wealth transfers and corruption that goes on in government and in business. So that's my solution. Now, what Trump is trying to do, and he's a conventional thinker, and I think he's acting in good faith. He's trying growth. He sit there and go, my goodness, look at this mess we got to get. How we got to get out of here? Well, we got to get jobs. We got to get jobs. We got to get the income going up. We got to get the tax revenues going up. So when he did not deficit spend and went straight for the tax cuts only, he was making the right play in terms of stimulating growth. I believe that with the debt to GDP ratio being like 125%, we're beyond the point of no return, especially when you look at, $50 billion a year in trade deficits. This is mission impossible. And he already said that he was the debt king during his candidacy. So that tells me he's a conventional thinker. He's not thinking out of the box. He doesn't know how to design or devise a comprehensive solution set that I'm offering the country becoming a senator.
Can we talk about the ordinary family, the ordinary worker, the ordinary saver, the retiree, especially with our aging demographic? We've got more and more people that are leaving the workforce. We have and trying to get by. So, for those who are still in the workforce and are actually producing, they're putting out work, they're producing an income, but what's going on with the saving rate, the tax rate? How possible is it in this systemic system that you've described for an individual to actually take care of themselves and their family properly?
My fellow workers, I've got some very bad news for you. You are a tax mule, a perpetual debtor, or a state dependent. You are enslaved by government, monetarily mostly. It's difficult to see it, but inflation, for example, is running around 5 to 6%. The government, through the B.S.E.E, claims it's 2%. Every year, they are devaluing your wages, your savings, and your pensions. And they basically do this to feed the financial elite. You know, I heard that there was one guy that's worth more than half the people in the United States. I mean, that to me is just terrible, absolutely terrible. And so, my fellow Americans, you are going to be exposed to continuing income inequality. Now, Trump has tried to get some companies to reinvest back into the United States with that tax plan where if you bring your cash over, there's a one-time payment to try to create jobs. Again, he's making the right moves, but they have devastated our manufacturing capability. You create wealth by making stuff, not service. That's just a wealth transfer. Not buying and selling stocks. That's just a wealth transfer. I mean creating wealth. You do it by making stuff. And they've gutted our manufacturing. I remember when I was in high school, they would have these tool and die shops for blocks and blocks and blocks, all these machinists. My dad was a machinist in there, and they would be using them to make plastic parts or metal parts and airplanes. And it was just go-go manufacturing. But this was in the 60s. When Americans said, can do. Now we say, probably not. So you're looking at continued income inequality, continued taxation, hidden taxation by wealth transfers, and the devaluation of your wages. Now, the markets are totally rigged. There is no more capitalism. Our money is an irredeemable Ponzi coupon. It's a con game. Because you used to save, and the saving rates are very low, they used to save to accumulate capital in a capitalistic society to invest into new businesses and jobs, and it worked very well. There are no more free markets. The money has been destroyed. And we are but a shadow of the capitalistic strength that we once were, and even in my lifetime, going back to the 1960s when I was aware. The millennials, I just feel so sorry for. The good jobs just ain't there. The house prices are absolutely out of sight. They can't afford to buy a home. They can't afford to get married and have kids of their own. Most of them are, I shouldn't say most of them. I know I hear stories about guys just giving up. Man, they're just hanging out in mommy's basement, playing video games. They've already thrown in the towel. And there's a lot of angry, sad folks out there. They don't know what's happening.
That's what I was going to ask you next. You've described a grave problem that's generational in nature, that's set up by design, that's systemic, and it's grinding the ordinary person down and reducing their options and their liberties and the choices that they have to take good care of themselves. So how do you see this playing out in social strife and in the psychological well-being of our populace?
As the federal government has passed more and more laws and became more control over our lives, they become increasingly totalitarian. This has to do with the pandering nature of political parties. Vote for me, I'll give you the goodies. Vote for me, I'll give you the program. And so, Congress doesn't think they're doing anything unless they pass a lot of laws. And the Supreme Court, the supreme totalitarian machine, let them get away with it. The Supreme Court has bastardized our Constitution, bastardized our republic. They have enabled DC totalitarian, and they operate by ideological judicial fiat. If you ever notice one of those confirmation hearings, it's a political circus. Mm-hmm. It never should be like that. Is the guy competent? Will he uphold the Constitution? Yes or no? That's it. There are no checks and balances in the system. Donegan, can you tell me when the last time a Supreme Court justice was booted off the bench?
I do not know of any.
That's never happened. There are no more checks and balances. So the markets are rigged. Capitalism has been destroyed. Between the two pandering political machines and the supreme totalitarian machine, they are concentrating more and more totalitarian power in D.C. It wasn't supposed to be like that. This was supposed to be a republic where all the states had their own little battles, distributed, and they work it out for themselves. They didn't unload on D.C. Now we have an unlimited government, a totalitarian, socialistic, fascist government in D.C., and it's out of control. And if you go back to the Constitution, which I, as a lawyer, that's my starting point. That's my main document I go to. In the preamble, it says in there a little phrase about ensuring domestic tranquility. I turn on the TV and I see vulgar demonstrations. I see politicians spewing rancor. The discourse is out of control. There's violence on the streets. Cops shooting people, people shooting cops, people shooting each other. The Constitution was just not a legal framework. It was a cultural framework. How can we all get along? Because we're a secular society, we have a lot of different views. How do we work that all out? And so they devised a brilliant system of a republic, a democratic republic. And the two pandering political machines and the supreme totalitarian machine over the last 100 years have bastardized our Constitution and have destroyed domestic tranquility. I think it's absolutely shameful. Most young people now, they're becoming, I guess, somewhat immune to it. I'm not. I'm old school. I go back, 50 years. I'm 63 years of age, so I've been around a while. And it didn't used to be like that. I mean, what happened to the noble liberal Democrat Party of John F. Kennedy? What happened to the conservative Reaganites who really wanted to balance the budget? They're gone. We have farcical Republicans and progressive fascists now ruling a totalitarian, socialistic, fascist machine in D.C. that seeks to control every aspect of our lives, creating social discourse. So it's not a pretty picture. I've thought this all through. I know how to fix it. I can fix it fast. But, I'm not, I did run for the presidency in 2016. I got a few delegate votes at the Libertarian Party convention. My first time coming out, after analyzing the comprehensive whole, devising a solution set, I just couldn't stay in my garage. and do nothing. I had to stand up and say, hey, I think I can help. I know how to solve this stuff. So I ran for the presidency. I lost that, being an unknown, and that's expected. I'm here in California. I don't have much of a name. The Democrats, using their progressive fascist techniques, have basically have become the sole power in Germany. Excuse me, the sole power in California. So she's going to be a pretty tough cookie to beat. She's got the whole machine and apparatus behind her. And so that's going to be a challenge. I hope to split the Democrat vote between good old, noble, classic liberals, the guys who protected your free speech, who really did help the poor, who didn't like foreign wars, the classical liberals. Those guys are my kind of guys. Also between these America First people that want to round up people up and build a wall, I think it's just very harsh, as opposed to the old guard Republicans who want a balanced budget. I might be able to split both votes and maybe have a chance at a second spot in the primary. That's why I'm coming on your show and trying to get some publicity. And I really thank you very much, Dunnigan, for inviting me over.
Yeah, in fact, on that note, I wanted to interject because you talked about your opponent, the establishment opponents, marshaling all the machinery, and yet you haven't touched on, here we are on an alternate independent media channel, but what about the mainstream media? Aren't they supposed to be kind of like the lifeguards at the swimming pool, keeping everybody safe and blowing the whistle when things get out of hand? I mean, no. Of course, the courts should have done that too, but you said you've already told out how they sold out, so go ahead.
They're in the tank. You said the pool? No, they're in the tank. Yeah. I've watched, news for 50 years. And Donald Trump is correct that the media has a bias. I don't have a name, so I'm not really newsworthy, so I'm not going to attract much attention. Since I'm the only libertarian running for the U.S. Senate seat, I'm pretty much a shoo-in for the nomination in late April. Might get a lot of publicity there, but that's only going to give me a 6 weeks window to try to get publicity in the state of California. So if anybody out there knows of some newspaper people in California, some radio show hosts or alternate media like this, give them a heads up. I'd like to talk with them. I think it's important that California have a third choice and a choice that is going to try to fix problems, common ground, and who has the knowledge base to recover quickly in the event of inevitable calamity.
Now, I wanted to get back to that because you've talked about, and I thought it was very well crystallized, you said the ordinary persons in our country are either perpetual tax mules or they're perpetual debtors or they're state dependents. And then when we started talking about millennials, it occurred to me a lot of the commentary we receive and high volumes of it to a lot of our guests that we have on our channel, you get like, I'm thinking of Charlton Heston dividing the Red Sea. On the one side, you've got people who are denying that there's a problem, it's all going to work out, it's all going to be growth, it's going to be technology, everything's going to come out rosy on the one side. Or on the other side, you have people who are thinking it's going to collapse down hard, it's going to be the end of the world as we know it. There's going to be potentially decades certainly, and potentially centuries to rebuild because we've so badly burned over and scarred our the ability to take care of ourselves, to grow our own food, to create things, and so on. And you've got some people in the middle who just aren't paying attention at all, just don't care to figure, well, they feel hopeless. They feel this whole thing has become so massive that their place in it, they have no idea what to do. But in contrast to all three of those options, you're proposing a completely different option, and that is a cold, hard look at reality, and also a hopeful view of can do. So if you could just spend a couple minutes, you've alluded to it several times. You said, I've got a plan, I know how to fix this fast, we could do this seamless thing. Is this something that you can help people at least understand some of the guiding principles that you would employ in doing that?
Well, first of all, the system will be maintained because you can always shrink 3% more off the value of a dollar. You can just keep shrinking it down and down and down till infinity. So the fiat dollar regime can continue inevitably. What will happen is you will see rapid devaluation of the dollar, and they have to keep it at low interest rates. They can't raise their interest rates. So with low interest rates and a devaluing dollar, you will see the bond market crater, and that's going to be your signal that something's going off. Okay. It's going down. You watch the bond market. Now, there are, first of all, if you really want to know the truth, all of the solutions are right there in front of you, reading the U.S. Constitution. It's all right there. You just got to have the political will to enact it. That political will is not going to come back until there is catastrophe, because Congress is basically bought in their cushy positions. They're not going to try to rock the boat. What this means is that we have to restore the republic. What that means is that we completely divest the social welfare complex at the federal level and distribute it. That will require, if you go back to the People's Party of 1880s, they had these postal banks. Well, you do the same kind of thing. In each state you have charter banks, and through that you can dispense social assistance. I believe in robust state-level safety nets, dependent upon the desires of the individual voters of that particular state. That you're going to have competition among the states, and you're going to find they're going to all come back into a happy medium. And it's local, and neighbors like taking care of neighbors, that kind of thing. I mean, Congress is so frustrated with these social issues that they can't even do their job. I mean, they gave the presidency basically the War Powers Act. You can go bomb anybody you want anytime you want, and Congress doesn't say a word. When it should be Congress that should be declaring war. So, wars are another thing. So we've got to talk in terms of currency translation, nationalizing the Federal Reserve, distributing safety nets through state-chartered licensed banks. That will go a long way to eliminate the corruption and the continuous taking and devaluing of people's wages, savings, and pensions. Now, there's a lot more to it that I don't really want to get into. It's kind of a thing where you don't want to tip off the market people, because they're going to try to front run something. But that is a lot of it. I would like to see term limits, senators 4 terms, congressmen 12 terms. Now, if you go congressman, senator, president, that's 56 years. You're 80 years of age. Come on, that's long enough in DCC. I mean, come on, that's long enough. So I'd like to see those term limits. I'd like to see. I don't think that any corporation, partnership, subchapter S, whatever, should be allowed to donate campaign money to an individual, because they don't vote for the individual. Now, that doesn't mean they can't give it to PACs. That doesn't mean they can't go out and free speech on their own all they want. But that might be something that we could look into. Also, what is somebody from Massachusetts donating to a state senator here in California?
Right.
I mean, shouldn't the local people be the ones who are supporting their own local candidates?
Right.
We got to look into the election laws a little bit, but getting back to the main things. Currency translation, distribute the social net, and now there's some other things that are pretty heavy, and most people are just going to be, I think, taken back a little bit.
Well, then I'm going to have to, we are over time already, and what we'd like to do is we could have you back on because there's a couple other points that you and I had proposed that we might be able to delve into that we didn't get time to tonight. We knew we wouldn't have time to get through everything, but if we can, you've whetted our appetite. You've certainly done more than that. You've given us actually a whirlwind tour through a very sobering but I think a good reality check that corroborates well people's gut feelings about what's going on and going wrong with our country that they love and would like to reclaim. So we've been speaking with Derrick Michael Reid. He is a candidate for U.S. Senate from California. He's been with us here on Reluctant Preppers. We'd like to have you back again and delve into some more of those topics that time didn't allow for tonight. And just wanted to thank you wholeheartedly for joining us on Reluctant Preppers. I have a feeling that many people are going to rewind and play back through sections of this because it is so densely packed with insight and information that people really need to hear. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dunnigan, for inviting me and letting me come on and talk.